The lemonade smells like summer and betrayal. Niu Cuihua freezes with her fingers curved around the glass, feeling the chill of condensation under her palm. Sunlight slants through the dining room's tall windows, scattering gold across the silver tray. Laughter and the clink of porcelain rise like a soundtrack from the ballroom beyond. Someone calls her name. Was it Secretary Wang? And it sounds distant, as if from underwater. This is one of those moments the old scripts like to repeat. Secondary character, maid who notices too late, cup lifts to the wrong lips. A twist of narrative déjà vu, sharp enough to cut. Somewhere in the back of her skull, a whisper of meta-awareness pops up like an annoying notification. Don't be the trope. Don't let the lemonade win. She moves not with the stiffness of a woman afraid to break dishes, but with the quiet, economical shove of someone used to serving without being seen. The glass is lighter than it looks. There is a sweet, almost effervescent note to the aroma, sugar and lemon, and underneath it, faint and wrong, a metallic tick that makes her mouth dry. She does not taste. She swaps the cup with the one she carries, a practiced sleight that leaves the tray's balance unchanged and the attention, brief as a blink, elsewhere. Miss Niu, Secretary Wang says, rounding the doorway with perfumed certainty. They asked for. On its way, she answers, breath even, voice the bureaucratic calm of someone who knows how noise becomes etiquette. For a second, Wang's eyes flick to her hands, then away. People do not often notice maids unless they want something. She tucks the suspicious cup into the pocket of her uniform. Her skin prickles. She could dump it out. She could pretend not to have seen. The meta whisper is louder now. Patterns repeat because no one breaks them. You can be the crack that lets the light in. A cold pressure settles at the perimeter of the house, the invisible kind that announces him before he arrives. Gold Jingtian's presence is a clean, clinical thing, like a window snapped shut against a storm. The CEO moves through the mansion as if it were a chessboard he can see in its entirety. People bend, conversations fall into silence, and even the chandeliers seem to dim to accommodate his shadow. He is standing by the ballroom archway, the backdrop of 100 social photographs, a man impeccably tailored in black that eats the sun, face expressionless as a sculpted mask. He is younger than the commission portraits would suggest, and he is watching, the way a man watches a pattern he means to break. For a pulse length, his eyes lock with hers, cold, precise, and she feels, briefly, absurdly, as if she has been scanned for weaknesses. He does not approach. The CEO does not approach, unless the approach is a plan. Instead, he lifts his chin toward the tray, as if asking an unspoken question. No one else notices the exchange between them. No, one ever notices the quiet things that are not meant for them to notice. But the mind hearing flares unexpectedly as a gasp. His. She hears his thought like a folded paper plane, sharp, surprised. Why would anyone tamper with catering now? Then, serving tray, hands steady. Then, a shade of curiosity. That maid's eyes are not the eyes of someone who serves for money. Hearing thoughts is supposed to make you superior or insane, depending on the writer. For Cuihua, it is an inconvenient perk. It gives her small head starts and cruel reminders. People are more often petty than murderous, but when petty is sanctioned by family and status, it blossoms into something lethal. The lemonade ends up, surreptitiously and without fanfare, in the kitchen sink. She rinses the glass with water that smells of bleach and old lemon, and when she returns to the ballroom, someone has spilled a conversation about an engagement ring, and people chuckle, the way the rich do when they are assured their economy is secure. Meng Suye glides through the room like someone starting to be worshipped. She wears petals of blush against her cheekbones and a smile that calls itself natural. She knows how to command cameras and how to distribute sympathy like confetti when necessary. Cuihua has seen her in magazines, trailing paparazzi like a constellation of approval. Up close, Meng Suye's smile is still as precise, but the eyes beneath it are iron. There is an easiness to her arrogance that has the weight of rehearsed performance. Cuihua does not forget a face that rearranged her life 4 months ago. Then, she was a different body, with a different past, someone else's appendix of a life. But someone beat the drum until she arrived here, wearing a uniform and the memory of a life that never belonged to her. She tells herself sometimes that she was never born into this plot. She tumbled into it. It is both liberating and nauseating. A bell rings. People stand. The engagement announcement begins the way ceremonies always do. A dozen polite sentences, a laugh with the right measured volume, the clinking of flutes. Ge Jingtian's voice is a cut-grass hush, but when he speaks, the room leans in to hear no matter how uninterested before. He announces the merger in formal lines between family lines as if he were reading a contract. Meng Suye smiles, and the light catches her necklace, a single, conspicuous pendant that glitters with the promise of a headline. Cuihua's memory stings, a detail plucked from a life that was not hers until she wore it. Manuscripts are full of similar designs, engagement chains that seal deals, necklaces that double as leverage. Her meta-awareness supplies possibilities like a map. Someone will want to disrupt that sparkle. Someone will want the necklace's fall to look like theft. She returns to the back corridors of the mansion after the ceremony to check inventory, her excuse more than her duty, hands still trembling from the near poisoning. In the supply closet, she finds Xiao Li crying. The younger maid's fingers clutch a small velvet box. Inside, a thin chain glints. "They put it in my locker," Xiao Li sobs, voice thin. "I swear I didn't." Cuihua crouches, ignoring the ache in the knees that does not belong to this body. The noise in her head hums, "Be practical." She takes the necklace with gloved hands and examines it. There is nothing counterfeit about its metal, but someone has smeared a faint, almost deliberate smudge across the clasp. Enough to suggest haste, enough to leave fingerprints that will lead somewhere manageable. "Show me everything you did after you found it," she says, not because she is suspicious, but because she needs details. People frame others by piling coincidences into a corner and watching the dance of assumption. Cuihua's mind moves through the possibilities like a chess player arranging pieces she did not own. Xiao Li tells a nervous story of late-night ironing, a forgotten locker key, and a clumsy man in the servant corridor who may have been Secretary Wang. Cuihua's stomach flips. The conspirators like to use other people as pawns. Those pawns are often those with less to lose. If they are careless, that means there will be witnesses with the wrong kind of conscience. She hides the necklace in her apron and, when the house quiets, slips out to the service exit. The night air outside the mansion, cold and tasting faintly of rain, feels honest. Up the street, a limousine idles like a brooding beast, headlights off, engine purring. License plates mean more when you know how to trace them. Symbol and metadata fold into motive. Gu Jingtian is waiting by the vehicle, his coat buttoned to the throat, eyes narrowed as though he is looking at a problem written in slow ink. When she approaches, he does not startle, but the slightest lift of his mouth suggests amusement that is not unkind. He knows her by now. Servants in the mansion gain the instructor's awareness quicker than outsiders imagine. "You handled the cup," he says, voice a precise carving of curiosity. "You saw," she answers, feeling a flush on the backs of her hands. She has nothing to hide but the necklace in her apron. Hiding things for the right reason is its own kind of sin. You are guilty until proven strategic. He studies her as if weighing a commodity. Why? "Because someone wanted someone to die," she says simply, "because that would be convenient." Silence shivers between them like a held breath. His thought slips like a small, private thing into her head. "I would rather they didn't kill anyone today." He does not know she hears him, Or perhaps he guesses and chooses to speak private anyway, because Gu Jingtian is not careless. Maybe he likes unpredictability. "We will secure evidence," he says after a beat. "You keep doing what you do. Tell me anything, any whisper you hear." The offer is dangerous. It loads her with responsibility and paints a target on her back. But she takes it, because the alternative, to do nothing while people maneuver for a fall, is intolerable. "I will watch," she says, "and record." He nods, small and humored. "Good. You will be careful. This family has many knives." He turns away, and in the retreat of his shoulders she reads a strange, almost adolescent vulnerability. He is not the ice sculpture the press adores. He is a man who shields himself with austerity because his family taught him power is best without sentiment. And for reasons that are slowly becoming a habit in her chest, she wants to be the one who notices the fissures in his armor. Cuihua days thrum with a new rhythm. Cuihua maps patterns. Who moves between the servants' corridor and the drawing room? Which of the household staff answers late-night calls? In which pockets Secretary Wang keeps his keys? She listens for thought fragments like the tick of a clock, an impulsive wish, a worry about appearances, the petty cruelty that later matures into conspiracy. Her gift is embarrassingly human. People think about things they intend to do, and sometimes forget to rehearse their internal scripts. Fang Qing becomes one of her unexpected allies. He is a large man with an unfussy face and a palette of small gestures that mean, "I don't ask, I protect." He is Gu Jingtian's bodyguard in the way that mountains are the bodyguard of valleys, immovable, quietly necessary. He has a way of watching people that includes watching the way they watch others, and he notices the way Xia Li flinches when Mr. Meng's cousin is in the room. He does not say much. He hands Cuihua an envelope one evening with a look that says more than words. Inside are surveillance footage timestamps. "You're careful," he says once when they are alone in the dim of the security office. "Your eyes are not just for dust." "I've learned to read what people don't mean," she answers, fingers tracing the edge of the paper. "That's useful and dangerous." "Good dangers are worth taking," he says. He lets the words go softly, like a private belief the world has denied. In the hush that follows, she thinks, he would not read her mind, even if he could. She likes him for not needing to. The mansion breathes its secrets. Cameras placed in hallways for safety become instruments of courtroom drama in her private imagination. A dropped cigarette butt is evidence in a future trial she has not yet mapped. Her meta-awareness gives her sketches of the future, flashes where accusations snap like a net, but never the endgame. That is good. Stakes need to hurt. One evening, while sorting through footage with Secretary Wang under the indifferent glow of the monitor, Cuihua sees the shape of a plan. A masked hand slipping into a locker at midnight. The hand belongs to someone in a uniform, too fine to be a maid's. The fingers close around a velvet box. The next frame shows a camera swinging, a shadow crossing, a neat, edited sequence that will later be shown in a court or in a headline. Only the footage here is raw and tells the truth. It was not Zhao Li who planted the necklace. It was someone with access and a motive. "That's old Meng's driver," Cuihua says, and her voice is a whisper that is not humility. Old Meng, the patriarch who has the kind of influence that redistributes companies like playing cards, has his people everywhere. Wang swallows. He is a man whose allegiance has been measured in small advantages. Cuihua understands this. If we go to Mr. Gu with this, what then? Then we make the story public, she says. We show the footage. We trace where the driver got the necklace. We show the world that the truth has been staged. That will shake families, Wang murmurs, as if realizing the scale of the dominoes. Good, she replies. Let it shake. When she brings the footage to Gu Jingtian, he does not shout. He does not throw a file across the room. He watches, the way a man watches a chessboard after 3 moves. He pauses the footage and rewinds, eyes narrowing until the world outside his face blurs. He says nothing for a long time, then speaks with the same low severity as always. You did well. It would be easier, she thinks, to expect a small compliment and then return to the kitchens. But the world has a way of complicating niceties. Instead, he sets a hand on the table, fingers splayed, and looks up at her like someone considering hiring Rain. "We will use this," he says, "but not as exposure. Exposure makes enemies desperate. We need a public reversal." "A public reversal?" Cuihua repeats. The phrase tastes like planning. "Make them show their own hands," he says. "Force the conspirators to move. When they do, they will leave footprints." She listens, and in the space between his sentences, she hears the shape of his plan. He will not simply out them with a broadcast. He will manufacture a situation in which they must act. Their action will betray them more loudly than any accusation. It is a sophisticated cruelty, and she admires it like one admires the sharpness of a knife. "How do I help?" she asks. "Think as the secondary character thinks, but with the agency he does not expect," he replies. "Tell me what you would do if you were the antagonist and you wanted to frame a maid without being obvious." She smiles without humor. "I'd use access, a locker key, a night shift cleaner. I'd choose someone with a record of needing money, or someone too naive to protest. I'd plant fingerprints that point to a servant and make sure security cameras have a blind spot." He nods, taking each detail like a note. "Good. We will plant a visible weakness," he says. "Then we will bait them into revealing the stronger one. And when they show us the stronger, we will catch them." Cuihua is struck by the cold clarity in his voice. He makes violence into an administrative act, a problem-solving meeting with consequences measured like a balance sheet. There is no romance in his logic. There is only the thing itself, victory through careful, unfeeling strategy. She likes that he does not patronize her. She dislikes that victory will demand people be humiliated and perhaps discarded. She consents because there is a moral economy here. People who weaponize marriage contracts for corporate takeover deserve to be exposed. Pawns used without consent deserve to be freed. The arithmetic of justice in their family is not sentimental. They set a trap, a banquet to celebrate the announced engagement, because nothing unites conspirators like a shared performance. Public displays tighten nerves and make people act. Cuihua plans the bait, twisting the threads she sees in her head into a pattern Gu can manipulate. On the night of the banquet, the mansion is a galaxy of light. Waitstaff move like coordinated comets, champagne flows like obligation. Cuihua works the side rooms, relaying small signals to Feng Qing and a selected few. A misplaced napkin here, a delayed wine delivery there. Each micro-failure is an intentional instruction the conspirators will interpret as weakness. It is the language of social predators. Flinch, and something will be offered to take advantage. Meng Suye is dazzling, as if the candles themselves lean toward her. Her necklace sits in the center of her décolletage, conspicuous and deliberate. She laughs in the way people with influence rehearse joy. Old Meng watches from a shadowed corner, his fingers steepled like a judge. Cuihua sees the driver slip through the crowd at one point, his eyes on the floor, face pinched with concentration. The man moves like someone carrying instructions in his bones. Cuihua's pulse simmers in her throat. She senses the conspirators closing a circle, feel the heat of a trap, almost flattering. She receives a thought, Gu Jingtian's, like a stone dropped into a quiet pond. Do not move until they make the first mistake. Then movement. A tray is toppled by a waiter pretending to be clumsy. The pendant knocks against porcelain, and for a heartbeat, the world tilts. Cameras swivel to catch the flash of metal. Amid the commotion, someone whispers, too loudly, about a lost necklace. Meng Suye feigns shock, her eyebrows sculpted into disbelief. Cuihua watches the driver edge toward the cloakroom and sees him slip the case under his arm. Feng Qing is already 3 steps behind, silent and enormous. The driver thinks he is doing the correct thing, retrieving an object he claims was misplaced by a client. He expects gratitude. Instead, Feng Qing's hand clamps on his shoulder with the casual cruelty of inevitability. The driver starts, spinning, his mouth forming a protest that dies at the sight of Gu Jingtian stepping into the circle of light like a tide. Gu Jingtian's voice is cool and precise. "Mr. Chen?" says, using the driver's name in a way that makes the air thicken with surprise. "Would you mind explaining why you had access to the dressing rooms after hours?" Chen's face flushes with color and fear. He stammers about orders from Old Meng. Old Meng's mouth clamps shut like a fist. The room hums now, edges amplified by the cameras and the click of phones. "No one moves," Gu Jingtian continues. "Security, review your footage. Everyone stays." The conspirators look at each other. The driver's betrayal is small, but it is a crack. When a crack appears, pressure concentrates there. Meng Suye's smile slackens. The practiced armor of her expression shows a hairline of panic. Cameras capture everything. Secretary Wang, who by now has been coaxed into an uneasy alliance with Cuihua, plays his part. Delayed security release, a confusion of schedules that ensures nothing is accidentally erased. The world at the banquet does not yet know it is a stage for unmasking, but under the ceiling's glass chandeliers, the players begin to sweat. When the security footage is brought to the large screen, projected in full, unedited, there is a murmured intake from the crowd. The clip plays. The masked hand in the locker. The driver's hand sliding the box down a corridor where Old Meng's cousin waits to find it later. The camera pans and captures the cousin whispering into a phone. There is a collective, slow intake of breath. Social currency is exchangeable for scandal, and the currency value drops precipitously when truth behaves like a falling knife. Meng Suye's eyes flash. She begins to speak with rehearsed offense, words about being targeted and the cruelty of gossip. Her fingers flutter over the pendant at her throat like a talisman. Old Meng opens his mouth to protest, but the footage continues, and his argument withers under the weight of the images. Cuihua stands at the side, feeling the hum of her own planned feedback into her. People look at her, some with suspicion, some with gratitude. Gu Jingtian, however, watches her as if he has just been given the answer to a riddle he did not know he was missing. There is a softness in his face she did not anticipate, recognition. Not of her as a servant, but of her as an intelligence that matters. After the banquet, when the house collapses into the fevered sorting of statements and damage control, Meng Suye storms into the corridor as if to find someone to blame. Her mouth is a thin line of fury. She stops at the sight of Cuihua leaning against the wall, apron dusted with flour and conscience both. "You think you win?" Meng Suye breathes, words sharpened with spite. "You think Mr. Gu will take your side because you played detective in the dark?" Gu Jingtian appears like a cold light. "She didn't win," he says dryly. "She helped. And she has something the rest of you lack, the truth." Meng Suye's eyes flash into something colder, dangerous. "Be careful which truth you serve, Mr. Gu. People are not like stories." Gu Jingqian's reply is a look that folds the conversation into irrelevance. "We will do what is necessary," he says, voice like a policy decision. "But I wish to thank you." He inclines his head to Cuihua, "for the cup and for your vigilance." "You're welcome," she says simply. It is not a line for romance, and yet it changes the architecture of their relationship. He has acknowledged her intelligence in public, and in a house that trades on appearances, acknowledgement is currency. It also paints a target on her back as someone useful and inconvenient at once. Meng Suye does not disappear into ignominy. Old Meng's family has levers that can be pulled. That night, in the quiet of the servants' passages, Cuihua hears the scrape of old alliances shifting. She thinks of the necklace again, how lipstick smudges and fingerprints lie to courts as easily as rumors. She thinks of how fragile evidence is when power wants to rewrite reality. And somewhere else in the mansion, in his private study lit like a temple, Gu Jingtian closes the blinds on the night and considers a different problem: how to use the truth not merely to expose, but to dismantle the web that would have used marriage as a purchase order. His mind works like a meticulous engineer thinking about failure points. He sees the family charts, the corporate documents, the way a signed engagement could hand too much to the wrong people. She hears a thought, not loud, not intrusive, this time his, certain and unexpectedly candid: "I don't want to be used." Cuihua's chest tightens. She wants to answer him, to say "you won't be," but she remembers how shapes shift in this plot. People want quick absolution. This man will be unbroken because she chooses to love him. That is too simple. She will not be a handmaiden to redemption. She will be an architect of it, and it will cost each of them something real. The days that follow are less about spectacle and more about the tedious grinding of consequences. The news cycle picks up hints of scandal. Old Meng's associates make quiet phone calls that mean nothing in public and everything in private. Meng Suya sues for defamation. She presses a narrative of victimhood, parents and sponsors composing a chorus of outrage. The house receives letters, petitions, an anonymous bouquet with thorns that say, "Back off." Cuihua, who once cleaned silverware in the pre-transmigrated life, has learned to fold strategy into her palms. Her meta-awareness gives her a map of probable moves, and Gu Jingtian's strategic mind arranges those possibilities into traps. They work together like two halves of a compass. She points out the destinations, he draws the circle. There are costs. A staff member is interrogated and later hospitalized with stress. Xiao Li avoids the press, but not the gossip. Secretary Wang's loyalty wavers under the strain of his career calculations. He is a man who has never had to choose between justice and survival, and he trembles. Cuihua spends nights awake, thinking of the driver and the price he paid for following orders. Men and women like him are easy to replace. The ethics of replacement is a quiet ache she carries. Her heart is not a storybook that opens and produces warmth. It is a ledger that balances obligations and desires in numbers she does not always trust. Yet small moments accumulate. Fang Qing bringing her tea without being asked, Gu Jingtian passing by the kitchen and pausing just long enough to ask about a bruise on her arm with a voice not of command but of care. These are the increments by which trust is measured, not the grand pronouncements. The conspirators do not give up. If one plan fails, they invent another. Old Meng's circle attempts to pressure shareholders with rumors of instability, a classic play that manufactures a crisis out of fear. They whisper that the engagement is a PR stunt, that the merger will collapse, that Gu Jingtian has been compromised. Cuihua sits in the small office next to the boardroom and writes down names. She taps at her phone, pulls up records, unspools timelines. Her thoughts are a steady, private litany. Fingerprints here, phone calls logged there, the driver's route, Old Meng's schedule. She orchestrates small reveals, a misdirected email here, a corrected invoice there. None of them titanic, but together they form a net no one can escape. One afternoon, in the silence of a practice room where the staff rehearse formal statements, Gu Jingtian asks her a question that slips past his policy tone. Why do you do this? It is not a question about obligation or reward. It is the kind of small, dangerous human question that asks for the shape of a person rather than a function. Cuihua looks at him, and for once her sarcasm softens. She thinks of the life she never lived, the one that vibrates like a parallel street behind her eyes. She thinks of the jobs she has held, driver's daughter, temporary seamstress, perpetually invisible, each one an education in being overlooked. "I don't like people being used," she answers. "Not by family, not by money, not by ceremony." He nods, as if that explains things perfectly. "Good answer," he says. Then, almost to himself, "I don't either." In the months that follow, their alliance tightens into something that teeters between friendship and something quieter. They move through crises and small victories, forced apologies released into the press, a compliant cousin ousted from his corporate seat, old Meng's phone lines traced to suspicious accounts. Each success unravels some of the tangled web the family had weaved. Meng Suye becomes more dangerous as her social capital dwindles. Panic makes people cruel. She begins to spread rumors about Cuihua, suggesting impropriety, hinting at blackmail. The necklace episode, once a tool of manipulation, becomes a cudgel used by different hands. Cuihua learns to answer not with anger, but with meticulous proof, receipts, timestamps, video clips. Public perception shifts in small increments, like the gradual tilt of a scale. Then comes the moment that changes the tenor of everything, a court of public opinion that moves from murmurs to a crescendo. A formal shareholders' meeting is called, meant to settle the merger's terms and, secretly, to decide whether old Meng's influence should be checked. Cuihua knows the stakes. Lose in the boardroom, and the family will buy new faces. Win, and they might lose privilege. Gu Jingtian proposes a radical move. He will not simply go to court or release the footage haphazardly. He will stage a board meeting where the truth is not read as accusation, but laid out as incontrovertible law. He will call witnesses, subpoena records, and force the conspirators to provide testimony. He tells Cuihua he wants her close. "You will be our unassuming proof," he says, with that same clinical warmth. People will not expect the maid to be an evidence-laden threat. She looks at him, at the way he is willing to weaponize her anonymity. There is a line between using someone and honoring them. She hesitates, thinking of the small body that houses a loud mind, and decides she will be the author of her own use. On the day of the meeting, everything smells like lemon again. Cleaners, suits pressed as if they hold lives together, the faint starch of dignity. The room gathers, faces made of calculation. Cameras perch like birds. Cuihua stands in the back, hands clasped, and feels the old scripts tug at her, the ones that would have her be the scapegoat, the comic relief, the side character who applauds others' glory. She refuses the part. She walks forward when requested and sits with Fang Cheng and Secretary Wang close by. Gu Jingtian sits at the head of the table, expression unreadable as an emperor's. The testimony begins. It is not dramatic, truth rarely is, but its ordinariness is its power. The driver admits under the weight of coordinated evidence and firm questions that he had been paid in cash to plant the necklace. Old accounts are pulled up. Bank transfers trace back to an account controlled by old Meng's finance head. Witnesses reveal conversations in corners overheard. The audio that had been cached on a phone, once dismissed as gossip, plays in the room and distills into a clean, damning phrase. "Make it look like theft." Meng Suye's face drains. She tries to pivot, to cry foul and claim targeting, but her words are hollow against recorded proof. The room takes on the atmosphere of a revelation. People who once smiled find their smiles brittle and sharp. At one point, with the pressure high, Gu Jingtian does something that surprises everyone. He turns to Cuihua and reads aloud a series of notes. Notes she had not intended to be shouted in a corporate chamber, from her own account of the night's surveillance. The way he presents her observations, without pomp, without the spectacle of a savior, grants them weight because they come from the margins. Her words, his voice, crystallize the conspiracy. Afterwards, when the room empties and the press swarms like hungry birds, Cuihua and Gu Jingtian stand in the empty hallway. The air smells like cold metal and victory. "You used my notes," she says, a sound of accusation folded into curiosity. "I used what was true," he answers, "and I used you because no one would believe the margin unless a man with a name put his weight behind it." She feels both gratitude and a prickle of irritation. "You made me useful." "You were always useful," he says. "You just were given no audience." The words are oddly tender in their simplicity. She looks at him, considering the line between acknowledgement and patronage. He reaches out, in a motion almost clumsy for a man so precise, and straightens the coffee stain on her sleeve she had not noticed. It is a small gesture, domestic and human, and in that smallness something shifts. They are not lovers yet. They are not even friends in any conventional sense. They are allies who have made a private economy. But there is an intimacy in the shared work of exposing truth, in the way two people who have been invisible versus untouchable learn to touch each other's lives with purpose. Outside the mansion, the fallout ripples. Old Meng faces shareholders with a mandate of mistrust, his empire's edges fraying. Meng Suye retreats, public image damaged. The driver is charged with being a pawn. Secretary Wang cleans up his spreadsheets and quietly resigns, choosing a different kind of survival than the one he had been extending. Cuihua returns to her apron and her daily inventory, but the world has altered color. The staff's eyes carry subtle niceties, nod that mean more than deference, respect. People who once looked away look at her now and see a person whose mind is sharp and whose loyalty is chosen. And Gu Jingtian? He is quieter, in the way of men who bear less applause and more consequence. He begins to speak to her more often in private, not commands, not requests. Conversations about small things, a bruise on a hand, a late-night delivery, a book he surprisingly enjoys despite its absence from his usual reading list. He shares, once, a photograph of his childhood home that surprisingly reveals a boy with untidy hair and a cat. She discovers he is not only cold, but complicated, in the way only someone trained to guard tenderness can be, precise about affection because affection leaves people vulnerable. One bite, as rain threads the windows and the house sleeps, Gu Jingtian stands at the kitchen door and offers her a thermos of tea. "For you," he says, with no fanfare. She takes it. "Thank you," she replies, and finds that it is no longer an exchange of employer and servant. It is a barter of two people who have shared danger and emerged with some small thread of trust. He tilts his head. "Would you like to leave the mansion sometime?" he asks, blunt as ever. "To see the city without schedules?" Her first instinct is to refuse. Her second is to ask, what would the story say? Then she surprises herself. "Maybe," she answers. "Maybe I will." Gu Jingtian's expression softens for the fraction of a second. "Good," he says. "I will arrange something. Discreet." She laughs, a short, honest sound. "You are growing sentimental, Mr. Gu." "Since when is being strategic not sentimental?" he counters. She rests the thermos to her lips and tastes lemon again, this time real tea, warm and unmanipulated. She thinks of the poisoned cup at the beginning, of the necklace and the banquet, and the way the world had nearly made an elegant woman die for a corporate chess move. "I don't want people to be used," she says to him, because he asked and because the words have become a kind of creed. He listens like a man storing a prayer. Then he says, almost in a whisper, a thought she hears and feels like an admission, "I want to stand with truth." And for the first time in months, she believes him. But the story is not over. Conspiracies do not end because one family falls. Old Meng has secrets that are not simply about leverage, but about history. And Meng Suye, stung and cornered, has friends who move in darker circles. The mansion holds more than one secret pocket. And beyond the gleam of publicity, there are private hands plotting a retort that will be crueler than the last. Cuihua knows this. The meta-awareness hums like a low wire in her mind. The narrative will not be pacified by a single reveal. There will be reprisals, more nuanced and deadlier, because now the players know the cost of being caught. She does not fear. She has come too far to circle back into invisibility. She has friends who are steady, Fan Qing, who breathes protection like a second language, Secretary Wang, who chooses a cleaner conscience, Gu Jingtian, who will use strategy like a surgeon. And perhaps, if the narrative allows, there will be something like redress. Not a fairy tale with roses and confessions staged on a balcony, but the slow work of recognition, a nod in public, a promotion hinted at in a board meeting, a salary moved from the margin to the ledger. She will take these things not as trinkets, but as steps toward a life where she is not invisible. When the next threat comes, a quiet letter, an anonymous tip meant to reopen the sore, they will be ready. The lemon scent in the air will no longer mean danger, but a reminder of how close they came to losing the truth. And Gu Jingtian will be there, a cold presence warmed by a loyalty that is no longer only his own. In the quiet after the first storm, the mansion resumes its chores, and the cameras roll past new headlines. Cuihua folds a napkin with the precision of someone who sews the edges of an argument closed. She hears his thought again, softer now. "Thank you." She smiles, and without thinking, she replies in a voice heard only by herself. "I told you I wouldn't be the trope." Outside, a car with an unfamiliar plate idles. Inside the house, plans are set like chess pieces across the tabletop of life. They will play them carefully, and when the enemy smiles again, confident in the old scripts, they will learn that the cold CEO is not the only one who can use thoughts to cut through deceit. There are many kinds of intelligence in the world, and sometimes the one who listens to the margins holds the sharpest blade. Secretary Wang was the first to see the car. He called it by its posture, the way it hugged the curb, engine purring like an animal that did not want to be noticed. He watched the license through the window and did not speak the number. He logged everything instead, slow and methodical, as if archivists could make treachery disappear. Fang Qing was faster. He moved through the service corridor with the quiet of someone who had learned to be absent until presence mattered. His phone slid into his palm, a thumb flicked instructions to 2 men at the gate and a third by the east hedgerow. The garden lights breathed. The men melted into shadow. Gu Jingtian stood in the foyer, sleeves rolled, the geometry of the mansion at his back. He did not frown. His face kept the economy of a man who weighed threats like chess pieces. He listened to Secretary Wang and to Fang Qing, and then he turned to Cuihua as though consulting a compass. "What do you want to do?" he asked, plain. She had been thinking in a different key. How to move truth when truth was a luminous thing that could be bent and photographed and dressed a scandal. The lemon in her mouth was a memory now. The thermos still warmed the table. She could stay inside, file reports, let the lawyers and the cameras take bids for a new narrative. Or she could step into the street and make the story prove itself wrong where it mattered, in daylight, in witnesses, in the small noises of ordinary life. "I will go out," she said, "only for an hour. No speeches, no cameras, a walk, a market, something ordinary." Gu Jingtian's hand brushed the banister, an unconscious sign of calculation. "You understand the risks." "I understand the risks better than anyone," she replied, "and I am tired of people writing my script." Her voice did not tremble. It had a trimmed edge, the sound of someone who had learned to cut away what was unnecessary. They planned as surgeons. Fang Qing would trail 3 cars back, close enough to intercept, far enough not to attract attention. Secretary Wang was the first. Wang would place a call to the one journalist they trusted, a small outlet that owed them a favor, not for headlines, but for eyes on the street. Gu Jingtian arranged for 2 board members to be visibly in a meeting in the city center, nothing to announce, everything to show continuity. Visibility, they decided, could be a shield as much as it could be a target. Cuihua dressed in a coat that disguised her posture rather than her profile, neutral colors, ordinary shoes, an appropriation of anonymity she had practiced for years. Fang Qing walked a block behind her, unremarked. 2 men in plain jackets occupied a cafe across the lane. Gu Jingtian watched from a black window of the car, his jaw a map of concentration. The city smelled of rain and exhaust and something else, flowers from a stall, the small theater of ordinary life. For a few tight minutes, she allowed herself the relief of being indistinguishable, a single body among many, and it was almost pleasurable. The world did not know her by plot points and scandal. It knew her by the slap of boots on pavement, the rustle of her sleeve as she reached for a fruit. They had not walked 3 blocks when the other car moved. The driver was precise. The man behind the wheel watched her through the rearview mirror with the vacuous patience of a hired looker. He adjusted his route to match hers. Feng Qing's phone vibrated once, a small electric heartbeat. The cafe man rose and shadowed the movement. Secretary Wang's voice was quiet in Gu Jingtian's ear. They followed in a loop, 2 blocks behind us. Good, Gu Jingtian said. Let them follow. To be followed was a small cruelty. To know you were seen, and to make the observer learn the wrong lesson, that you were not afraid, was a strategy. Cuihua felt the old training sting. She had learned to fold and unfold like a paper knife. She slowed her pace and let the world compress into the sounds around her. The slapping of a newspaper, the chirp of a bicycle bell, the low radio from a shop. At the stall near the corner, she stopped to buy a ripe pear. The vendor smiled at her like any other customer. She paid with a bill she knew the vendor would accept with no questions. She offered the pear to no one. In the slight dip of her shoulders, the watcher misread her. He thought she was a woman unbothered, shopping. He did not see the way she dropped the black ribbon she had worn at her throat into the vendor's hand for a moment, an old ribbon, an empty loop she had used as a signal before. The vendor pocketed it with the practiced discretion of someone who had once been paid to hold a letter. The car paused. The watcher saw the ribbon passed. He made, in his own mind, the connection between ribbon and message and opportunity. He dialed. Feng Qing's men moved. They closed a corridor she had practiced with her feet. A hand brushed the shoulder of the watcher as he turned to move away, friendly, territorially correct. He shifted, startled, and that was all the space Feng Qing needed. 2 strong hands folded over the man's shoulders and guided him across the pavement into the shadow of a delivery alley. "What do you want?" Feng Qing murmured as if they were old chess partners. The man laughed a laugh that was too small for the size of his fear. "Coins," he said. "A few coins for a job. Nothing personal. You don't have to know." "Whose?" Feng Qing asked. The man blinked and gave a name that was not his salvation. "Liang. Liang's people. Old connections. For a good payment, you get a good story." They kept him for 10 minutes while Secretary Wang's small recorder, disguised in a cigarette pack, caught the patterns of his excuses. The man had the smell of cheap coffee and other people's errands. He had a thin camera tucked in a shoulder bag and a phone with a small, cracked screen. On the screen were messages in a language of money transfers and anonymous numerals, and one entry that repeated like a chorus, an account name, a P.O. box, a single address in the industrial stretch near the river. Gu Jingtian read the address and made a decision on the margin of a breath. "We go there," he said. His voice was not a question. Cuihua looked at the man's face as if turning a page. There was no villainy there worth more than the bill he had been paid. He was, like many in the chain, replaceable. There would be another hand to sign for the money. They were not dismantling the entire network by catching one driver, but they were tracing a seam. "Take him to a room," she said, carefully. "We extract what we can, and then we'll make a choice." They did not threaten the man beyond what his conscience had already inflicted. They asked questions and watched his eyes. He gave answers that were oily with omission. He named Liang again and then tried to name a broker who was careful with papers. He said, finally, with the kind of intimacy that tells you where people truly keep their secrets, "There's a warehouse by the old mill docks. Cameras are blind at night. They meet there." "Why come here instead of taking it straight to Liang?" Secretary Wang asked. The man shrugged the human shrug of someone who had been taught not to think too far ahead. Safe handoffs, he said. People take chances by looking safer. They let him go with a warning that was stronger than fear. They told him the cameras in the neighborhood would watch his block for a week. He left, stumbling into the rain like someone expelled from a warm room. Back at the car, Gu Jingtian's fingers tightened once around the steering wheel. Liang, he repeated. The name was a pebble in his mouth. Not Meng Suye. Cuihua's first response was a small, dry laugh. Names changed hands like currency in the city's darker market. If it's Liang, she said, then Meng Suye plays a larger table than we thought. He has partners in those quarters, people who do not mind bloodied hands. Gu Jingtian nodded. Then we do not play at the table. We take the board. They moved toward the docks with the coiled purpose of those who prefer preemption. The warehouse was a low, squat thing with corrugated sides and a gate that had seen better years. Night had already dyed the river the color of old metal. Across the water, the city lights winked. Behind those lights, deals were made in rooms with curtains drawn. They approached with measured steps. Feng Qing had brought 2 men in the van, and Secretary Wang had organized the logistics with the small efficiency of someone who had chosen the cleaner conscience. Gu Jingtian placed himself at the gate and watched the line where shadow met shadow. He had no gun visible and no swagger. His presence was an assertion of control rather than a claim of violence. Cuihua stood beside him, a small figure against the warehouse's bulk, and felt more herself than she had in months. A single door dented open and a light broke. 2 men emerged, more careful than the driver, but not careful enough. Their conversation spilled into the night, dull as any man's who talks to trade engines and who likes the assurance of a return on investment. "We don't have time," one said. "Suye wants this closed fast. If we hit her public, we make more noise," the other returned. "Better to keep it personal. A whisper to the right ear will open more than a headline." The name landed like a stone. Cuihua's pulse did not rise. Instead, she felt a keen, crystalline readiness. They had expected retribution, but the fashion of it mattered. A whisper to the right ear suggested an influence with mouths that loved scandal more than facts. Radio hosts, talk boards, the small tidal web that turned rumor into movement. Gu Jingtian's reply, when he let it out, was the sound of a closing book. Not if the whisper has to cross us first. The men looked up, startled, and for a moment the night balanced on a blade edge. Then they moved as if to run. Feng Qing's 2 took one, Secretary Wang the other. The fight was quick, clumsy, the sound of bodies learning the script of being caught. They found on one man a thin folder of photographs, staged frames of a life misread, and on the other a list of contacts, scribbled in a hand that trembled only when love of money overcame secrecy. Among those contacts was a name they had not expected, a boutique PR consultant known in certain circles for turning disaster into a product, the kind of person who could stitch together a narrative and sell it to the highest bidder. The paper also bore an annotation in a hand with a flourish, Meng Suye's name, but accompanied by another, old connections still useful. They took the notes, the men, the photographs, and then the other things, a thumb drive, a baseball card with a number, an old key. Each object had the spare, precise quality of evidence. None alone would topple the network. Together, they were a mirror. They left the warehouse in a passage that smelled of oil and old wood, carrying what people had been paid to forget. The night closed around them like silk. No fireworks followed, no triumphant deputations, just the slow work of cataloging, of placing each small prize on a table and looking at it. Back at the mansion, under the wash of safe lights and the slow churn of domestic machinery, Gui Jingtian and Feng Qing sorted through the materials, while Secretary Wang set to trace the transfers. Cuihua sat with the photographs and did what she always did. She read people as if they were sentences. She traced fingers along the edges where faces had been cropped or lightened, where hands were set to look guilty. Someone had taken the care to manufacture angle and shadow. Someone else had paid for the precision. "It's a campaign," she said finally, "not to hurt me alone, to make the idea of me toxic enough that the board will look at liabilities instead of abuses." "And Meng Sui?" Fangqing asked. "Was not the architect of this alone," she said, "but he is a patron. He chooses people who know how to cut at reputation." Gui Jingtian folded a photograph and did not look at it. There were 100 ways to dismantle a reputation. There were correspondingly fewer ways to rebuild it. "We will name the channels," he said. "We will make the web visible. If they want to smother truth with rumor, we will shine lamps on the places they hide." Cuihua allowed herself a small, sharp smile. "Then we will not be quiet." Their next days would be a new pattern of work. Legal teams combing for the slightest falsity. Their allies placed on gentle public view. The board fed a steady drip of verifiable fact. They would use the journalist's small outlet to publish a careful rebuttal, the kind that did not trumpet innocence so much as returned agency to evidence. They would not shout. They would present receipts. And while the public watched the slow, sober dance of facts, they would take the evidence they had and follow its thread. There was, however, the knowledge that claws deeper than staged photos could still scratch. Old Meng had friends in quiet pockets, and Lang, if Lang was the middleman, moved with a patience that suited people who traded in slow ruin. Cuihua could see the outline of escalation. A whisper might become an accusation. An accusation might demand a resigned posture. A resigned posture might become a concession. They worked through the night. At 3 in the morning, after the documents were scanned and the photos logged, and a pattern of transfers had begun to form in Secretary Wang's spreadsheet, Gu Jingtian paused and looked at her. "If they come with legal threats, we answer with law. If they come with smear, we answer with evidence. If they come with physical threat," he did not finish the sentence. She did not need him to. The mansion had walls and hired guards, but what she feared less than harm to her body was harm to other people's lives. "We will not let others be made collateral because of what I survived," she said. "We protect the perimeter." Gu Jingtian's hand brushed her sleeve, the contact of a strategy that had grown, in the quiet, into something warmer. "Then we build a perimeter." When morning came, it brought with it a small, public tremor. A mid-sized outlet ran a piece, an innocuous account of the board's decision to review certain protocols in the wake of recent events. It was factual and without flourish, but it had the effect of introducing legitimate scrutiny into the public record. Cuihua watched the piece go live and felt, once again, the old, delicious business of being invisible while being effective. They had not won anything more than time, but time, they both knew, was often the currency of redress, and the city, always hungry for movement, began to shift. Its attention. New actors stirred. Old Meng, in a place of reputation and power, would listen to counsel. Meng Sui, stung and cornered, would reach for his contacts. Liang would be paid to be careful. The noise would escalate. Cuihua made tea and handed it to Thang Qing. He drank and nodded, understanding the truce between fatigue and vigilance. Secretary Wang, who had been at his desk since midnight, let his head rest against the back of his chair for a single breath. Gu Jingtian went to the window and watched a car with an unfamiliar plate move past the gate and keep going. He did not look surprised. He only adjusted his tie and turned back to the table where evidence lay like a small, stubborn map. "Then we prepare for the next movement," he said. Cuihua folded another napkin, a reflex she never quite shed. The napkin in her hands did not need the precision of the stitches she used years ago, but the motion steadied her. Outside, in the warehouse district, a light blinked in a second-floor window where no one had been before. A phone rang, and someone answered, with the ease of a man who had rehearsed calm. "They took the bait," a voice said, "but she's not alone." On the other end, someone else laughed softly, more interested in the continuing game than its outcome. "Then the game becomes more interesting," they answered. "We will not play by their rules. We will make the rules painful." Cuihua heard none of those voices. She heard only the soft scrape of a chair as Fang Qing rose and the faint clink of cup against saucer. She felt the room tighten like a glove, protective and practical. They were not naive about the scale of what lay ahead, but they were also no longer the passive center of other people's dramas. The world had tried to write her as a trope. She had refused. Now she would write back, not with declarations, but with the slow durability of truth, evidence, witness, careful public record, and the quiet courage to stand where the whisper could find no purchase. Night moved into day, and day into action. Messages arrived. A lawyer who would meet at noon. Fang Qing confirming surveillance shifted to a different quadrant. Secretary Wang noting a suspicious small transfer at dawn. Each message was a small chisel against a stone. At noon, when she left again, this time to the lawyer's office, she did so with a different posture. She had been given a small, formal card by the journalist. "If anyone asks, we have an appointment at 2. No comment before then." It was a leash of protocol and also a shield. She walked with purpose. The city watched and catalogued, unaware of the inner structures that now hummed like a hive. A man on a bench watched her pass and clutched a paper bag of food. A street vendor rolled his cart and asked nothing. The habit of ordinary life gave her cover, as it always had. A text arrived on one of the phones Secretary Wang had left with her, an anonymous photo of a morning broadcast, already edited and smiling with implications. Someone was moving faster than they expected. Cuihua took the phone and looked at the image. It was a still from a clip showing a blurred figure at a company event, hands placed near a corporate ledger. It was cropped to simulate intimacy. The caption asked questions. The message had no sender. She put the phone in her pocket and kept walking. Her face gave nothing. Her mind, however, was already at work. Where the clip had aired, who owned that channel, which producer would trade discretion for money. The list was a map. She folded the map into a pocket of resolve. Gu Jingtian met her at the lawyer's marble steps, his presence like a sign. They entered together, the two of them walking into rooms designed for clean language and controlled outrage. They had lawyers who would make the law a barricade and a blade. But legal action would be slow, and smear had speed. Cuihua understood the rhythm of rumor. It moved quickly and then congealed into something that could be eaten at leisure. They had to move both quickly and with an eye for the slow. When they stepped into the lawyer's office, waiting there like a small, practical god, was the journalist. He rose, pushed a small envelope across the table, and sat back down. "Open it," he said. His voice had the sound of someone who had owed a debt and wanted to be straightforward about payment. Inside the envelope was a single sheet and a USB. The sheet was a ledger, names and dates and account entries that matched some of the transfers Secretary Wang had found. The USB had a file, time-stamped, that showed a set of emails between an untraceable address and a PR consultant's account. Cuihua exhaled a sound that might have been a laugh if hope and weariness could have mixed politely. "This is good," she said. "Good means actionable," Gu Jingtian corrected. "We publish the connections we can verify. We push the narrative of transparency. We do not sensationalize. We force the issue into governance. And we protect the people in the chain who will be targeted if we expose everything at once," Secretary Wang added. "We are not trading lives for headlines." They arranged a measured release, a dossier for the journalist, a sealed file with the regulator, and a public statement that invited investigation rather than accusation. The aim was to make the smear a problem of governance rather than a spectacle. They left the office with a new plan and a new patience. The city had not turned yet. The game continued, but they were now in possession of instruments to alter its tempo. As the sun slid toward evening, a small delivery arrived at the mansion, a bouquet of white lilies, anonymous, with a single card pinned among the stems. The card read, in a hand that could only be described as practiced, "Congratulations on the courage to be seen. A friend." Gu Jingtian held the card and read it twice. Cuihua watched him and felt a curiosity she could not yet name. "Friends are useful," she said. "Friends can be dangerous," he answered. "They make enemies feel urgent." She folded the card and put it in the pocket of her coat. Outside, the city spun on. Inside, they catalogued what they had gathered and prepared to follow the thread a little further. The threads were not neat, they never were, but they had direction. In the dim light of the study, with evidence piled like small, patient cliffs, Cuihua found herself thinking of the many ways a story could be told, as confession, as accusation, as pity, as triumph. She wanted none of those reductions. She wanted instead the slow work, boring to many, but true to her, that would change the ledger of her life. A visible place at the table, remuneration that matched effort, a refusal to vanish. Gu Jingtian watched her and then looked at the papers. "We are not only defending you," he said. "We are changing the rules." "And if they break the rules?" she asked. "Then we make them pay," he said simply. She believed him, not as a rhetorical promise, but as a tactical proposition. Belief in this life was most useful when paired with action. They slept in fits that night, brief, attentive, the sleep of people who keep one ear on the door. Before dawn, Secretary Wang sent a short note. An account had been frozen, a PR consultant's number had been tapped, a small donation to a talk host had been traced to a shell company. Not everything was victory. Most of it was procedural, plodding, and the kind of progress that could be undone with enough resources and cruelty. Somewhere in the city, Lang moved his pieces. Somewhere else, Meng Suye took a consultation and considered escalation. Messages crossed hands and screens and paperbacks. The rumor mill swirled. The newsroom that had once considered taking the story now felt the gravity of being part of a narrative. At noon, the board called an emergency meeting. Cuihua was not invited to sit at the center of it, as she had feared, but she was allowed to offer a statement through counsel. She refused the scripted apology some expected. She gave, instead, a sober account and an insistence. "If the company wishes to be built on truth, let us begin with the truth." The board's response was cautious. Power, she knew, was not always nimble, but the conversation had begun in a way that made cover-ups more awkward and governance more necessary. Later that afternoon, as rain began to thread the windows again, Gu Jingtian received a photograph on his private line. Meng Suye, a man at a private club, smiling too wide, an arm around a companion whose face they did not yet recognize. The caption was a single line: "He is not yet finished." Gu Jingtian showed the photo to Cuihua without comment. She looked and then folded the paper behind the journal she had been reading. "We are not finished either," she said. Weeks would pass, small victories would accumulate, and small defeats would sting. The city's appetite for drama would shift and return, but the core of the story, the part that concerned Cuihua, would no longer be solely about survival. It would be about definition, about who got to name the arc of a life. As dusk settled and the house settled into its rhythms, a courier arrived with a thin package for Cuihua. Inside was a small, leather-bound notebook with no name but full of appointments, meetings with regulators, a list of witnesses, the names of people in the board who had been sympathetic. Someone had done the labor of collecting allies. She touched the cover and felt the paper's weight. For the first time in months, the shape of a future seemed less like a rumor and more like a plan. Outside, the city pulsed. Inside, knives were polished and papers arranged. They were not naive about what would come. Conspiracies, once lit, had a way of burning the air around them. But they had prepared, not only with force, but with the slower weapons of law and record. And when the first formal charge rolled toward them, a formal complaint from an anonymous source that sought to make her resignation the tidy end of a messy tale, they were ready. They responded with documentation and witnesses and a public outline of the transfers the anonymous clip had obscured. The tide did not turn overnight. Reputation moves like ice, stubborn and slow. But the momentum shifted. Whispers that had been profitable began to cost. Those who had sold their services to Old Meng's circle found in the new light that the market for rumor was less lucrative when regulators and journalists asked more exacting questions. Cuihua, who had once been taught to fold herself into silence, now practiced a different kind of restraint: selective transparency. It required patience and courage in new allocations. She learned to release pieces of truth with the same care she had once used to wrap fragile tools. Each release was a small act of courage: the publication of an email, the testimony of a quiet accountant, the revelation of a transfer that matched a PR campaign's ledger. Through it all, the lemon scent, once a memory of poison, became for her a reminder of survival. And when the first public acknowledgement came, not as the gaudy confession of a villain, but as a formal recognition, an adjustment in company policy, a private statement from a board member acknowledging procedural failure, she accepted it like a measured reward. It was not a public apology from Old Meng. That would come only if the pressure became unbearable. But it was the first small piece of that slow redress she had imagined, a movement of life from the margin to the ledger. They had not undone everything. Some people who had been used in the scheme remained unexposed. Some reputations were still for sale. But they had changed the game by making the transactions visible. At night, Gu Jingtian and Cuihua sometimes walked the mansion's gardens together. They did not speak as much as they listened, to the fountain's small music, to the rustle of leaves, to the fragile human sounds that made the house feel like a place of living rather than a stage. "Are you satisfied?" he asked once, as if the question were a tool one could choose. She paused and then smiled, small and truthful. "Satisfied is a long word, but I am no longer invisible." He nodded. "Then we keep visible." They had built a perimeter, and it held for now. The war of whispers and ledger would continue. The city had other appetites. But they had a map and hands that could read it. Beyond the gates, cars still moved with unfamiliar plates. Inside, though, they kept watch in a different way, not with fear, but with intent. The next time the enemy smiled, they would know the faces behind the smile, and they would be ready, not with impulsive fury, but with the slow, implacable work of making truth as inconvenient as it deserved to be. The work was far from finished. The players would reconvene and new moves would be made. But for the first time since the poisoned cup, the arc bent toward recognition rather than annihilation. Cuihua folded a napkin and wrote, in small, neat letters, a single line at the corner: "Not the trope." She placed the napkin in a drawer and closed it gently. The lemon scent lingered in her memory, and in the mansion's quieter rooms, a reminder of what they had survived and of what they still protected. Outside, the city carried on. Inside, they arranged the pieces for the next day. They would not be surprised again without having prepared. The enemy would smile. They would be watched. They would answer with facts, with allies, with the slow currency of proof. And when the next move came, because moves always came, they would be ready to meet it with the same care they had learned to keep.